Queen Nera stood on the crystal balcony of her palace, watching 3 suns set over the capital city of Velker Prime. The golden light reflected off the towers that stretched toward the stars, each one a symbol of her vast empire. 17 star systems bowed to her rule. Millions of ships carried her banner across the galaxy. Yet tonight, she felt more peaceful than she had in years. "The blue flowers are blooming again," said a gentle voice behind her. She turned to see Ben walking onto the balcony, his hands dirty from working in the royal gardens. His brown hair was messy, and his simple clothes were stained with soil. Any other queen might have been embarrassed by such a husband. But Nera smiled warmly. "You spent the whole day with those flowers," she said. Reaching out to brush dirt from his cheek, Ben nodded, his green eyes bright with quiet joy. "They only bloom once a year. I wanted to make sure they had enough water." This was Ben Torres, her husband of 3 years. While other royal consorts demanded armies of servants and chests of gold, Ben asked only for a small plot of land where he could grow things. The Velkan nobles whispered that their queen had married beneath her station, but Nera knew better. In Ben's simple presence, she found something her empire could never give her: peace. Their love story had begun in the most ordinary way. Ben had arrived at her court as a small-time human trader, carrying goods from distant worlds in his tiny cargo ship. Most humans who reached Velkan space came with grand plans for profit or glory. Ben came with honest prices and kind words. "Your Majesty," he had said during their first meeting, bowing respectfully but not too deeply, "I have spices from the Kepler system and textiles from New Terra. Nothing fancy but good quality." Other traders would have claimed their goods were the finest in the galaxy. Ben simply told the truth. When the palace cook tried his spices and declared them excellent, Ben had smiled and said, "My grandmother's recipe. She always said the best flavor comes from patience, not expensive ingredients." That night, Nera had invited the humble trader to dinner. She had expected him to be nervous, to stumble over his words in the presence of royalty. Instead, Ben had asked thoughtful questions about Velkan history and listened carefully to her answers. When she mentioned the stress of ruling 17 systems, he had nodded with genuine understanding. "Leading people is heavy work," he had said simply. "Even leading a small trading crew taught me that. I can't imagine the weight you carry." No one had ever acknowledged that weight before. Advisors praised her strength. Generals celebrated her victories. But Ben saw the cost of power and offered quiet sympathy. Instead of empty flattery, their courtship had been gentle and honest. Ben never asked for titles or wealth. He never pushed himself forward or tried to impress her with grand gestures. When she invited him to stay at the palace, he asked only for permission to plant a small garden behind the servants' quarters. "Plants make any place feel like home," he had explained. Kneeling to examine the soil with careful hands, the Velkan nobles had been horrified when Nera announced her intention to marry the human trader. Lord Commander Zek, her chief military advisor, had requested a private audience to express his concerns. "Your Majesty," Zek had said, his forearms gesturing dramatically, "this human has no noble blood. No military record, no great achievements. What will the other systems think?" "They will think I chose happiness over politics," Nera had replied firmly. "But the bloodline, Your Majesty. The royal genetics will be just fine," Nera had cut him off. "Ben is kind, honest, and intelligent. Those are the traits I want in my children's father." The wedding had been simple by royal standards. Ben had worn borrowed formal clothes and spoke his vows in careful, practiced Velkan. When the ceremony ended, instead of demanding a celebration, he had asked if they could visit his garden together. "I want to show you the tomatoes," he had said with shy pride. "They're almost ready to harvest." Now, 3 years later, Ben's garden had grown to cover half the palace grounds. He woke before dawn each morning to tend the plants, his gentle hands coaxing life from seeds and soil. The kitchen staff loved him because he provided fresh vegetables and herbs. The cleaning staff appreciated his quiet politeness. Even the royal guards had grown fond of the man, who always asked about their families. Ben never attended the grand court functions unless Nera specifically requested his presence. He preferred to spend his evenings reading in their private chambers or working on small mechanical projects. His cargo ship, now stored in the royal hangar, had been lovingly maintained despite never being used. "Do you ever miss trading?" Nira had asked him once. Ben had looked up from the plant database he was studying. "Sometimes I miss seeing new worlds," he admitted. "But I found something better here. Purpose, peace, you." The Velkan nobles still didn't understand their queen's choice. During state dinners, Ben would listen politely to their conversations about military strategy and economic policy, but he rarely spoke unless directly addressed. When he did contribute, his comments were always thoughtful, but never boastful. "Humans have an interesting perspective on trade routes," Ambassador Kryn had said during one such dinner. Clearly testing Ben's knowledge. "Every species sees space differently," Ben had replied calmly. "Velkans build strong, lasting routes. Humans tend to find shortcuts. Neither approach is wrong, just different." It was exactly the kind of diplomatic answer that revealed intelligence while avoiding conflict. But the ambassador had clearly expected more aggressive self-promotion from a human. Ben's greatest talent seemed to be making himself unremarkable. He moved through the palace like a shadow, helpful but never intrusive. When Nira worked late into the night on government business, Ben would quietly bring her tea and massage her shoulders without saying a word. When foreign dignitaries visited, he would smile politely and fade into the background. The only time Ben showed any real passion was when he talked about growing things. His eyes would light up as he explained the proper soil mixture for Terran wheat or the breeding patterns of Centauri orchids. He had turned the palace gardens into a showcase of botanical diversity, with plants from dozens of worlds growing in perfect harmony. "How do you make them all grow together?" Nira had asked one evening as they walked among the flowers. "Every plant has different needs," Ben had explained, kneeling to examine a struggling vine. "But if you pay attention and give each one what it requires, they can share the same space. This one needs more shade, so I planted it near the tall stalks. That one prefers rocky soil, so I built it a special bed." It struck Nira that Ben approached everything in life the same way. He paid attention to what each person needed and quietly provided it. Without asking for credit, the palace staff had gradually grown protective of their gentle master. When new servants were hired, the older ones would quietly warn them, "Be respectful to Ben. The queen loves him, and he's never cruel to anyone." Ben seemed unaware of this protection. He treated everyone with the same quiet kindness, from the lowest kitchen worker to the highest military commander. When young servants made mistakes, he would patiently help them fix the problems without reporting them. When guards complained about their equipment, he would quietly repair or replace damaged items from his personal workshop. His mechanical skills were another surprise. Ben could fix nearly anything, from kitchen appliances to communication devices. He claimed it was just a useful talent for a trader who couldn't afford professional repairs. But his work was precise and clever. The palace engineers had started bringing him their most difficult problems. "Where did you learn to work with quantum circuits?" Chief Engineer Vex had asked after Ben repaired a critical power regulator. "Trial and error, mostly," Ben had replied with his characteristic modesty. "When you're alone in space, you learn to fix things yourself or go without." But even his technical knowledge seemed ordinary compared to the real experts. Ben never claimed to be the best at anything. He simply did what needed to be done and moved on to the next task. This quiet competence extended to his relationship with Nira. He never offered unsolicited advice about ruling the empire. But when she asked his opinion, his answers were always thoughtful. He had a talent for seeing problems from unexpected angles. "The mining guild is demanding higher compensation," Nira had told him one night. Frustrated after hours of negotiations, Ben had set down his book and considered the problem. "Are they asking for more money or more recognition? What's the difference? Money suggests they think the work isn't paying enough. Recognition suggests they think the work isn't valued enough. Different problems need different solutions." The next day, Nira had offered the guild a formal ceremony honoring their contribution to the empire, along with a modest pay increase. The miners had accepted immediately, thrilled to have their dangerous work publicly acknowledged. Small insights like this had gradually made Ben an unofficial advisor, though he never sought the role. Nira found herself discussing problems with him more and more often, drawn to his practical wisdom and gentle perspective. But Ben's influence remained invisible to most of the court. He attended meetings only when specifically invited, and he spoke so rarely that many nobles forgot he was present. Some visitors didn't even realize the queen was married until they saw Ben quietly working in the gardens. This anonymity seemed to suit Ben perfectly. He had no interest in court politics or social climbing. His greatest pleasure appeared to be the simple satisfaction of growing things and supporting his wife's challenging work. The arrangement worked beautifully for 3 peaceful years. Then the Skarn Confederation arrived at their borders. The first reports came from the outer colonies. Panicked messages about massive fleets and devastating weapons. The Skarn had appeared without warning, crushing the border defenses with overwhelming force and advanced technology that made Velkan ships look primitive. Nur called an emergency session of the War Council. Gathering her best military minds in the strategic planning chamber, Lord Commander Zek spread star maps across the massive table while his assistants input the latest intelligence reports. They hit 6 systems simultaneously, Zek reported grimly. Our patrol fleets were completely outmatched. The survivors described ships twice the size of our dreadnoughts, with weapons that can crack a planet's crust. Admiral Haas, commander of the home fleet, studied the tactical displays with growing alarm. Their technology is at least 50 years ahead of ours. Our shields can't stop their main guns, and our weapons barely scratch their holes. What about allies? Nira asked. The Centauri Federation? The Trade Coalition? Already contacted, Zek replied. The Centauri are mobilizing, but their fleets are weeks away. The Coalition is offering supply support, but no military aid. Everyone's afraid of these Skarn. Nira felt the familiar weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. 17 systems looked to her for protection, and her military advisors were already talking about strategic retreats. Ben sat quietly in a corner chair, his presence so unremarkable that some officers seemed surprised when they noticed him. He listened to the discussion without comment, occasionally making notes on a small tablet. Your Majesty, Admiral Haas said carefully, we need to consider evacuation protocols for the inner systems. If we can't match their firepower, 3 million people live on the border worlds, Nira interrupted. We don't abandon them. But the military situation... I understand the situation, Nira said firmly. I also understand my duty to protect Velkan citizens. The debate continued for hours. Some officers proposed desperate last stands, while others advocated strategic withdrawals. The Skarn forces were advancing steadily, giving them perhaps days before the next wave of attacks. Ben remained silent throughout the discussions, though Nira noticed him occasionally frowning at his tablet. When the formal session ended near midnight, the officers filed out with grim expressions, leaving the royal couple alone in the vast chamber. What are you writing? Nira asked, exhaustion clear in her voice. Ben looked up from his notes, his expression thoughtful. Just trying to understand their pattern. The way they're moving, the targets they've chosen, there's something familiar about it. Familiar how? I'm not sure yet, Ben admitted, closing the tablet. Maybe it's nothing. Just reminds me of something I read once. Nira rubbed her temples, feeling the enormous pressure of the crisis. My advisors want me to order a general retreat, save the core systems, and abandon the borders. Ben moved to stand behind her chair, his gentle hands massaging the tension from her shoulders. What do you want to do? Fight, Nira said immediately. Those people trust me to protect them. But how do you fight an enemy with superior technology and overwhelming numbers? Sometimes, Ben said quietly, the strongest enemy has the biggest weaknesses. They become overconfident, predictable. His hands worked steadily at her tight muscles, and Nira felt some of the stress beginning to fade. This was why she had married Ben, not for a political advantage or military alliance, but for moments like this, when his quiet presence reminded her that she wasn't alone. I should get some sleep, Nira said finally. Tomorrow will bring more bad news. Ben nodded and began turning off the chamber's lights. As they walked toward their quarters, he paused to look back at the star maps still glowing on the tactical display. Ben, sorry, he said, joining her in the doorway. Just thinking about those movement patterns. The Skarn are very organized. That night, Nira slept fitfully, her dreams filled with burning cities and desperate evacuation ships. When she woke before dawn, Ben's side of the bed was empty. She found him in his workshop, bent over his tablet and several old data crystals. "How long have you been awake?" she asked. "A few hours," Ben replied without looking up. I remembered where I'd seen those tactical patterns before. Had to dig through some old trading files. Had anything useful. Ben hesitated, his expression troubled. "Maybe I need to check a few more things." The morning brought worse news. The Skarn had broken through another defensive line and were advancing toward the heavily populated Nexus system. Nira's generals estimated they had perhaps 48 hours before 3 million. Civilians would be under direct attack. The Emergency War Council convened again. But the mood was even grimmer than the previous night. Several officers openly advocated immediate evacuation of the threatened systems. "We cannot win a direct confrontation," Lord Commander Zek stated bluntly. "Our only option is strategic withdrawal to defensible positions and abandon 3 million people." Nira demanded. "Better to save what we can than lose everything," Zek replied. "These Skarn are too strong." Ben listened from his corner chair, occasionally glancing at his tablet. Nira noticed him studying the faces of her officers, his expression unreadable. "What about asymmetric warfare?" Ben asked suddenly, his quiet voice cutting through the heated debate. The room fell silent. Admiral Haas turned to stare at the humble gardener who had dared to speak on military matters. "Excuse me?" Haas said with barely concealed irritation. Ben didn't seem intimidated by the attention. "Hit and run tactics. Sabotage. Make them fight your kind of war instead of theirs." "This isn't a trading dispute," Zek said dismissively. "We're talking about space warfare against a technologically superior enemy." "Every enemy has supply lines," Ben replied calmly. "Communication networks. Weak points they don't expect anyone to find." Several officers exchanged glances, clearly annoyed that a civilian was offering strategic advice. But Admiral Haas looked thoughtful. "What kind of weak points?" Haas asked. Ben consulted his tablet. "I've been studying their attack patterns. They're very coordinated, which suggests central command and control. If you could disrupt their communications, their encryption is unbreakable," Zek interrupted. "Our intelligence division already tried," maybe Ben said quietly. "But there might be other approaches." The debate continued, but Nira noticed Ben growing quieter as the minutes passed. He seemed to be wrestling with some internal decision, his expression increasingly troubled. As the council session stretched into the evening, reports arrived of the Skarn's continued advance. Time was running out for the border colonies, and Nira's advisors were losing hope. "Your Majesty," Zek said finally, "I formally recommend immediate evacuation of the Nexus system. We cannot save everyone, but we can save some." The weight of command had never felt heavier. Nira looked around the table at her exhausted officers, then at Ben sitting quietly in his corner. Her gentle husband met her eyes and gave a small, encouraging nod. "I need time to think," Nira announced. "We'll reconvene in the morning." As the officers filed out, Ben approached her chair. "I'm going to check on the night-blooming flowers," he said softly. "They need extra attention when they're stressed." Nira nodded absently, her mind focused on impossible military decisions. It wasn't until hours later that she realized Ben's small maintenance shuttle was missing from the royal hangar. By then, it was too late to stop him. Queen Nira stared at the empty shuttle bay where Ben's maintenance craft had been parked for 3 years. The small vessel was designed for basic repairs and supply runs, not for venturing into a war zone. Her heart raced as she realized what her gentle husband had done. When did he leave? She demanded of the hangar supervisor. "About 2 hours ago, Your Majesty," the Velkin replied nervously. He showed proper authorization codes and said he needed to check the outer communication relays. Right. Nira closed her eyes. There were no communication relays in the direction Ben had taken his shuttle. He was heading straight toward Skarn territory. Within minutes, the Royal Communications Center was buzzing with activity. Officers scrambled to track Ben's shuttle, but the small craft had already disappeared beyond their sensor range. Lord Commander Zek arrived, his 4 arms gesturing frantically. "Your Majesty, we must assume the human has been captured," Zek said bluntly. "This could compromise our defensive positions." "Ben would never betray us," Nira replied firmly. "Perhaps not willingly, but the Skarn have advanced interrogation methods. We should consider changing our military codes." The thought of Ben in enemy hands made Nira feel sick. Her quiet, gentle husband was no soldier. What had possessed him to fly into danger alone? The next 12 hours brought a strange silence from the front lines. The Skarn advance, which had been relentless for days, suddenly slowed. Their coordinated attacks became sporadic and confused. Nira's intelligence officers struggled to understand the change. "Something's wrong with their communications," Admiral Haas reported during the morning briefing. "Their fleet formations are breaking apart. Ships are responding to conflicting orders. Equipment failure," Nira asked hopefully.
"Unknown, Your Majesty."
"But 3 of their forward battle groups have actually started firing on each other. It's like they think their own allies are enemies." Zek studied the tactical displays with growing amazement. "This makes no sense. The Skarn are disciplined and organized. They don't make mistakes like this." Throughout the day, reports continued to arrive of chaos in the Skarn ranks. Their invasion force was tearing itself apart, ships attacking their own allies and commanders issuing contradictory orders. The mysterious breakdown was so complete that Nira's forces were able to reclaim the border. Systems without firing a shot, but there was still no word from Ben. On the second day, a badly damaged communication probe drifted into Velkan space. The device contained a single message, transmitted on an old Terran military frequency that few people remembered how to decode. Nira's chief intelligence officer, an elderly Velkan named Tor, spent hours working on the encryption before finally breaking through. His expression grew more shocked with each line he translated. "Your Majesty," Tor said carefully, "you need to see this." The message was brief and written in Ben's simple style. Skarn command structure compromised. Planted false intelligence suggesting traitors in their ranks. They're hunting each other now. We'll maintain pressure for another 48 hours, then return home. Don't send rescue ships. Love you. Nira read the message 3 times before the implications fully hit her. Her gentle gardener husband had somehow infiltrated the most dangerous military force in the galaxy and turned them against themselves. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Tor's hand shook as he accessed the probe's secondary data files. "Your Majesty, there's more. The transmission originated from a Skarn command ship. Somehow, your husband got aboard their flagship." "That's impossible. Ben's just a traitor." "Perhaps," Tor said slowly, "we should investigate his background more thoroughly." Yes. What they discovered over the next few hours changed everything Nira thought she knew about her husband. Ben Torres wasn't just any human traitor. According to classified Terran military records, he was Admiral Benjamin Torres, former Supreme Commander of the Terran Defense Network. His tactical genius had ended the devastating Proxima War in 72 hours, saving billions of lives through strategy rather than force. The records painted a picture of a brilliant military mind who had revolutionized space warfare. Torres had pioneered the use of psychological operations and information warfare, turning enemies against themselves rather than engaging in costly direct battles. His final mission had involved infiltrating the Proxima Federation's command structure and convincing them that their own allies were planning betrayal. But the files also revealed why Ben had disappeared. After the war, Admiral Torres had been hailed as a hero and offered the highest honors. Instead, he had requested immediate retirement and then vanished completely, leaving behind a note saying he was tired of being a weapon and wanted to find peace among the stars. "He faked his death," Nira breathed, staring at the intelligence reports. "My Ben is the most famous military strategist in human space, and he's been pretending to be a simple traitor." The revelation explained so much. Ben's careful way of listening to conversations, his ability to see problems from unexpected angles, his knowledge of mechanical systems and communication networks. Even his gardening made sense now. He was someone who had spent years destroying things. trying to learn how to make them grow instead. Meanwhile, the Skarnd Confederation was collapsing in spectacular fashion. Their fleet commanders were arresting each other on charges of treason. Entire battle groups had abandoned the invasion to return home and root out suspected traitors. The invasion force that had seemed unstoppable just days ago was now scattered across dozens of systems, fighting itself instead of the Velkans. It's the most beautiful military disaster I've ever seen, Admiral Haas admitted grudgingly. Whoever planned this understands Skarnd psychology perfectly. They're naturally paranoid and suspicious. Turn that against them, and they'll destroy themselves. But Nira couldn't appreciate the tactical brilliance while Ben was still missing. His shuttle had been gone for 3 days with no word beyond the single message. The small craft wasn't designed for extended operations in hostile space. On the 4th day, long-range sensors detected a tiny object limping toward Velkan space. The signature matched Ben's shuttle, but the vessel was barely functional. Hull breaches, failed engines, life support running on backup power. Nira personally led the rescue ships that intercepted the dying shuttle. When they brought Ben aboard, he was unconscious and badly injured. His left arm was broken, his face was bruised, and there were burns on his hands from emergency repairs, but he was alive. The medical team worked for hours to stabilize his condition, while Nira paced the hospital corridor like a caged animal. When the doctors finally allowed her into his room, Ben was awake, but groggy from pain medication. "How's the garden?" he asked weakly, trying to smile. "Forget the garden," Nira said, fighting back tears. "Why didn't you tell me who you really are?" Ben's expression grew serious. "Because I'm not that person anymore. Haven't been for years. You just destroyed an entire invasion fleet. I think you're exactly that person." Ben struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "I destroyed them by making them destroy themselves. That's all I've ever been good at. Finding ways to make people fight each other instead of fighting me. You've saved 3 million lives. I've taken more lives than I've saved," Ben said quietly. "The Proxima War made me a hero to some people and a monster to others. I was tired of being either one." Nira sat beside his bed, taking his uninjured hand in both of hers. "So you became a gardener instead?" "I tried to," Ben admitted. "For 3 years I thought I had succeeded. I was happy just growing things and taking care of you. But when those people needed help, I couldn't ignore what I know how to do." "How did you get onto their command ship?" Ben's smile was rueful. "Same way I always do. I made them think I was someone else. A Skarn engineer with urgent repairs for their central computer systems. Old habits, and you've planted false information about traitors? Skarn culture is built on competition and suspicion," Ben explained. "All I had to do was forge a few messages suggesting that certain commanders were planning to betray the others. Their natural paranoia did the rest, but you were hurt. How did you escape?" "Barely," Ben admitted. "They caught me just as I was finishing the upload. Had to fight my way back to the shuttle bay, and their security forces don't take prisoners." Nira studied her husband's battered face. This was still Ben, still the gentle man who brought her tea and massaged her shoulders. But now she could see the steel underneath, the tactical mind that never stopped analyzing and planning. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I go home and check on my tomatoes," Ben said simply. "They probably need water." But leaving the hospital proved more complicated than expected. Word of Ben's true identity had spread throughout the palace, and suddenly, everyone wanted to meet the legendary Admiral Torres. Officers who had barely acknowledged him before now sought his advice on everything from fleet formations to supply logistics. Ben endured the attention with polite patience. But Nira could see how uncomfortable it made him. This was exactly what he had been trying to escape. "Lord Commander Zek wants to offer you a position as Chief Strategic Advisor," Nira told him as they finally returned to their quarters. "I know," Ben replied tiredly. "Admiral Haas wants me to redesign our entire defense network. Ambassador Kryn thinks I should establish an intelligence service. Everyone has plans for Admiral Torres. What does Ben Torres want?" Ben looked out their bedroom window toward the gardens he had spent 3 years building. "Ben Torres wants to check on his night-blooming flowers and maybe fix that broken irrigation pump in Sector 7. Over the following weeks, as news of the Skarn defeat spread across the galaxy, Ben gradually faded back into his preferred invisibility. He politely declined all offers of military positions and formal honors. When visiting dignitaries requested audiences with the famous Admiral Torres, Ben would mysteriously be unavailable, usually found working in some distant corner of the gardens, the Skarn. Confederation never recovered from their self-inflicted disaster. Their paranoid purges continued for months, with commanders constantly arresting each other on suspicion of treason. By the time they realized, they had been manipulated. Their military was in complete disarray. Nira's empire emerged from the crisis stronger than ever. The other systems had seen how effectively the Velkans handled the Skarn threat, and several new worlds requested to join their alliance. But the credit for victory went officially to Velkan military leadership. Ben's role remained classified, known only to a handful of senior officers. "Don't you mind not getting recognition?" Nira asked him one evening as they walked through the gardens together. "Recognition for what?" Ben replied, kneeling to examine a struggling plant. "For tricking people into destroying themselves? I'm not proud of what I did, even if it was necessary. You've saved millions of lives." "I ended a threat," Ben corrected. "That's different from saving people. Real heroes build things, create things, help things grow. They don't just find clever ways to make problems disappear." Nira watched her husband carefully transplant the ailing flower to better soil. His hands were gentle and patient, the same hands that had once commanded fleets and orchestrated the downfall of enemies. "Is this who you really are?" she asked. "The gardener or the admiral?" Ben considered the question seriously. "I think they're both me," he said finally. "The admiral is what I was trained to be, what I'm good at when the situation demands it. The gardener is who I choose to be when I have the freedom to choose." "And you choose to grow flowers instead of commanding fleets?" "I choose to spend my life with someone I love, doing work that makes the world a little more beautiful instead of a little more dangerous." That night, Nira found Ben in his workshop, carefully maintaining his old shuttle. The small craft had been badly damaged during its mission to Skarn space, but Ben was slowly repairing every system. "Planning another secret mission?" she teased. Ben smiled, holding up a quantum circuit board. "Just keeping it functional. Never know when we might need to take a trip somewhere. We could take the royal yacht. It's much more comfortable." "Sometimes," Ben said quietly, "you need transportation that nobody pays attention to." Royal yachts get noticed, Nira understood. Even in retirement, Admiral Torres was prepared for the possibility that his skills might be needed again. The shuttle represented his ability to disappear into the galaxy if necessary, to become invisible and unremarkable once more. But for now, Ben seemed content with his chosen life. He spent his days in the gardens, his evenings reading or working on small projects, and his nights holding the woman he loved. The galaxy might remember Admiral Torres as a legendary strategist, but Queen Nira knew him as the gentle man who brought her flowers and reminded her that even queens needed someone to share the weight of their crowns. 6 months after the Skarn crisis, Ben's blue flowers bloomed again. Nira found him sitting among them in the early morning light, a cup of tea in his hands and an expression of quiet contentment on his face. "They're beautiful," she said, sitting beside him on the simple wooden bench he had built. "They only bloom when they feel safe," Ben replied. "Took me 3 years to get the conditions right." Nira thought about her husband's long journey from admiral to gardener, from commanding fleets to nurturing flowers. He had found his way to this bench, this garden, this peaceful morning, through choices that had cost him fame and glory, but given him something more valuable. "I love you," she said simply. Ben smiled and took her hand. "I love you too. Both of you, the queen who rules 17 systems, and the woman who sits with me among the flowers." Around them, the garden bloomed in magnificent diversity, each plant thriving in its chosen place. Like their marriage, it was a testament to the idea that the most beautiful things grew not from force or manipulation, but from patient care and genuine affection. The galaxy might always wonder what became of the legendary Admiral Torres, but Queen Nira knew exactly where he was, right beside her, watching flowers bloom in the morning light.